One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Good morning. This is One Step Ahead Radio, and it is 30th of August 2024. We are still on planet Earth, and there are so many things happening in our world in relation to sustainability, sustainable development, as well as ESG. Now, this week has been full of interesting reports coming out, both from oil and gas industry like Exxon. I will take you through some of the developments in that space, also in regards to future development of oil and gas services, and also reserves that are available for continuous exploration of the growth trajectories of the companies. And I will, of course, bring you forward to some of the information that is relevant in terms of artificial intelligence. And is it really something that we can deem environmentally sustainable, or is it something that will actually make situation even worse in so many cases? Now, aside of that, a couple of other things related to developments in China. China is indeed outpacing the West world in so many dimensions on sustainability, and actually particularly in relation to climate decoupling of their growth with their CO2 emissions. It's a new thing, hasn't been observed before. I'll take you through some numbers. Very interesting to see where China is heading, and also a bit scary to see that the future seems Chinese in so many dimensions that we can start asking ourselves, is Western world, Western democracies, are they really sort of adapted to take on the challenge as we know in relation to climate change and also sustainable transition compared to some of the autocratic countries like China is? It's a question that could be and should be debated around the world. Aside of that, what is happening in Namibia is quite scary. There are, due to the drought, a lot of things are going bad in Namibia. Government has decided to kill hundreds of wild animals to feed the population. It's a population of 3.5 million people living in Namibia. I don't know if you've ever been there. I have. It's a beautiful place. It's scary to know that these beautiful creatures, animals, will be killed due to the drought, but they will at least be fed to people that are hungry. It's also an interesting debate. Now, there is one more thing that I'll take you through, which is the fact that the tax money, or taxpayers like you and me, and taxpayers around the world are actively supporting oil and gas companies, especially in the US, but also in Europe, to get subsidies from the government, our tax money, that is later on invested into CCS technology and other type of technologies that are still in many cases not commercially viable, too expensive, and also in many cases not really the solution. Now, with that in mind, I'll take you through some of the things that are related on artificial intelligence. Now, there is a question, will artificial intelligence ruin the planet or save the planet? If we look at some of the numbers, I mean, this has been debated for some time, but there are also some interesting sort of numbers coming out in various studies done by big consultancies and big banks. And Goldman Sachs is one of them, and they have estimated that electricity use by data centers will increase 160% by 2030. A recent forecast by the International Energy Agency is projecting that demand would more than double by 2026. That's 2 years from now. These predictions are all sizable increases. They are suggesting that sharply higher green gas emissions will be generated from data centers if they obtain power from fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. Pay attention that natural gas is part of that. But keep in mind one thing, the global electricity sector is huge and it's quite diverse across the world. So data centers today, they account for about 1 to 2% of total electricity demand across the world. That share is, according to these estimates done by Goldman Sachs and International Energy Agency, they will increase to 3 to 4% by 2030. So the question is, what is the keys or case for artificial intelligence as a green technology? Artificial intelligence is a general purpose tool, and this is what experts say. If it's widely used across the economy, it could reduce green gas emissions by 5 to 10% by 2030. This is a study that has been done by the Boston Consulting Group and was commissioned by Google. Now, with that taken into account, you can actually imagine the capacity of artificial intelligence to be used in some areas where we previously did not have ability to use it, which could be a biological design, across the world. It could be developing or actually being deployed to discover deposits of minerals around the world that we need for transition. The one that recently has been used, it's a vast deposit of copper that has been component discovered in Zambia. Now there is a lot of artificial intelligence across the world that is used to look at the geothermal projects, using it to find the geothermal capacity across the world. So the takeaway, I mean, for the artificial intelligence, of course, is that it will be increasing the electricity capacity, electricity demand, and as you could see that earlier, almost double by 2030. But given that energy shift is happening in many places in the world, hopefully these data centers that will be built with the ability to actually generate what they need to generate through the means of using renewable energy. Now, consumption output of the world data centers jumped sixfold from 2010 to 2018. Energy consumption rose only 6%. So it means that artificial intelligence and the use of this kind of energy, the use of this kind of technology, is indeed increasing the energy consumption, and it's creating or posing the question. I think the sort of a conclusion on this is that the judgment is pretty much still out in what way it can be used. I don't think we know all of it right now. I think there will be a lot of things happening within the next 3 to 5 years in the space of artificial intelligence, where we would be able to see a bit more clearly what exactly that could be, and also in what way artificial intelligence could be supported by other means of energy than the fossil fuels. Now, we move on to China, and China has been a topic of One Step Ahead Radio a couple of times. And I used to tell people listening that if you want to understand what is going on in the sustainability transition space, there are of course 3 areas to look at: China, US, and to a certain extent European Union, although the latter one is a bit smaller than the 2 previous one. But in Chinese context, you have to understand one thing. China's emissions are falling. In March, they declined by 3% year on year. This is the first drop in 14 months, according to analysis published by Carbon Brief. It's a specialist news website. Preliminary data show that China emissions probably fell in April too. It's early days, that's obvious, but if trend continues, the country emissions may never again rise to the levels they did in 2023. This is a really historical thing. There is, of course, a lot of questions. Is this something that it's going to sort of remain? But what is interesting is that if you're looking at the kinds of economic activity that have been increasing in China, and they are powered by clean electricity. Last year, China installed almost 300 gigawatts of wind and solar capacity. For comparison, Great Britain's total power capacity is less than 100 gigawatts. This gives you a bit of a feeling where China is. This allows more production to happen with the fewer emissions. And China is basically continuing to grow, not in a sectors that are energy intensive, in terms of the cement production and all of that has been decreasing in China, but China is decoupling the economic growth from the CO2 emissions. And this is quite interesting from a perspective of other countries in the world, including the US, but also many European countries that are still struggling with the same issue that China has. With this in mind, it's also interesting that China has most likely reached all of their carbon targets they have set 6 years ahead of the date they were set them to be achieved. It is achievement, and I think as it looks, they have reached, if anything, nothing big changes. There seem to be a peak of the emissions, and the fact that renewable energy, the Chinese biggest producer and user of renewable energy today, is enabling them to continue to grow the economy from completely different angle. That was about China. Of course, there are other parts of the world. In the US, debate is a bit different, dominated pretty much by oil and gas companies in many cases. Exxon has been out, and it's warning that's basically saying to all of us that the global oil demand will remain virtually unchanged by 2050. And they warned also that any move to curtail investment in fossil fuels would trigger a new energy price shock. In a forecast released on Monday, the US supermajor said oil demand would stay above 100 million barrels, excuse me, a day over the next 25 years. This is a forecast that assumes, excuse me again, that the energy transition will fail to curb the world's first for fossil fuels. This is quite alarming because what Exxon is actually saying is that fossil fuel consumption going forward will remain the same, not really increase, but remain the same, which basically mandates oil companies, not only in US, but in other parts of the world, like in Europe, to continue drilling and expanding their capacity to extract fossil fuels to feed the economy. This is, of course, completely taken away. It's taking away the projections by International Energy Agency that the oil demand will decrease next couple of years, especially until 2030. And this is, of course, significantly needed for the world in order to be able to provide measures to tackle increased climate change and also consequences related to climate change going forward. Exxon is, in contrast to the basically some of the UK oil majors like BP. The BP is one of very interesting company. They are actually spelling out that the consumption in this space will decline to 75 million barrels by 2050. And International Energy Agency supporting that. But bear in mind one more additional thing, which I mentioned last One Step Ahead radio session. The BP is getting punished by the financial stock markets for expanding or trying to expand the renewable energy exposure, while Exxon is getting actually gifted or basically supported by financial markets to further expand their oil and gas extraction capacity in the future. Now, this is interesting from another context, and it is another context that I mentioned initially, which is the global one, where we as a taxpayers across the world, regardless of where you are, our governments are using money to support oil and gas companies to get subsidies to develop technology to continue doing what they do. And these oil and gas companies are really good in getting the money. So the governments have handed out about 13 billion in subsidies for carbon capture and fossil hydrogen over the past 40 years, with hundreds of billions potentially up for grabs through the new incentive, according to a new report by Oil Change International, which is a non-profit tracking the cost of fossil fuels. To date, the European Union plus just 4 countries, the US, Norway, Canada, and Netherlands, account for 95% of the public handouts on CCS and hydrogen. The US has spent the most taxpayer money, some 12 billion, in direct subsidies, according to this organization, with a fossil fuel giants like Exxon hoping to secure billions more in the future years. The industry preferred solution could play a limited role in the curtailing global heating, and everybody knows that, according to International Panel on Climate Change, and are being increasingly pushed by wealthy nations on the annual UN Climate Summit to actually look at the CCS technology from a completely different way. Now, this said, imagine what we could do with the subsidy monies in terms of the direct investments in not only renewable energy solutions, but also some of the energy efficiency transit solutions that are needed in the world or across the world. Now, there is a big question on how this picture of developments in the US, including the subsidies, will look like after the elections in the autumn. My take on this is that you should not expect any big significant changes in underlying sort of economic model that is being deployed in the United States. And it's quite obvious, both from a perspective of, I would say, what energy companies are doing, but also what financial industry is doing in the US. Most of the US banks, the big Olympic team of the US, the big banks have withdrawn their commitments from Climate Action Plus. And I was recently interviewed, actually give a comment into Reuters that you are able to see if you want to see that and read it, where I outlined some of the things that are related to the reasoning behind why some of these big banks are making decisions to do so. And I think one of the conclusions that I draw from what I know in the context of this is that they are actually just following the pursuit of profit in terms of how they generate shareholder returns to the shareholders they have directly linked to their business operations, which is, of course, perfectly fine. And of course, the last but not least, the what is happening in, and I mentioned that earlier, in Namibia, is of course outrageous that the elephants, hippos will be killed in Namibia, basically harvesting hundreds of animals, including hippos and zebras. Through the national parks, because the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism said that more than 700 animals have been earmarked, including 83 elephants, 30 hippos, and 300 zebras. You can think this is not actually a relevant topic or something but it's extremely sad to see that this is happening in one of the countries that has been very severely struck by a drought. Being a big tourist destination, Namibia is of course very dependent on tourism, and when that does not work due to the climate change, these more brutal solutions are at hand. This will be all for this week. I hope that this was interesting and giving to all of you listening. Thank you very much for joining. Please join us next week, and we will continue next week with interview with one of the persons that is arranging one of the biggest regional conferences in eastern part of Europe, where she will give us their view on what is going on in the part of the world or part of the Europe that is not on the agenda so often from sustainability point of view. A very interesting interview. I would suggest you to dial in and tune in and join in next week. And I wish you all a great weekend. Thank you very much for participation, and have a nice weekend. Thank you. Bye.